Welcome to the Baby Sleep Connection, a podcast that explores baby sleep and more through the lens of attachment and development. I'm your host, Heather Boyd. I'm a mom of 3, an occupational therapist, and a certified infant and family sleep specialist. If you are a tired parent who wants to support your baby's sleep holistically, keep listening as we delve into approaches that go well beyond the usual strategies of wake windows and bedtime routines. Your baby's sleep is connected with so much more. Hello and welcome back to the Baby Sleep Connection podcast. I am your host, Heather Boyd. Now, if Family Feud asked the question, what are things that parents of babies worry about? There would be a few that would be at the top of that survey says, and I think sleep would be right on the top, followed by perhaps meal times and feeding and growth. Now, if we polled doctors at Well Baby Visits about what they found parents asked about, I bet you they would top out with those same 3. Sleep is, of course, very important for the growth and development of your baby, and it takes time to develop. It can be a very wild ride in the first 3 years, but having some idea of how much sleep your baby needs can be very helpful when you're navigating how to look for sleep cues, when to offer sleep, how to support your baby in developing a routine and rhythm around the day, and supporting their circadian rhythm. But many parents don't know what typical sleep even looks like and what to expect. So what can you expect of your baby's sleep? Well, we know that most babies fall into some pretty predictable patterns for how much sleep they're getting at a particular age. But what your baby needs may be higher or lower than the average. And last, getting enough sleep for them has signs that you can look for. So how much sleep does your baby need? Well, I use recommendations from the National Sleep Foundation and the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. Now, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine had a panel that collected hundreds of sleep studies. They mulled them over, argued and debated, and then voted, and got a consensus of what to recommend for babies and adults at particular ages. Now, I'm always a little skeptical of consensus. I prefer when those studies can be used and consolidated statistically so that we get a little bit less opinion, a little bit less likely to be influenced by people around that table who may be a little more articulate or pushy to get their views across. I prefer meta studies that take those hundreds of studies, mull it down to the best quality studies and base the recommendations on that. But I don't think we're doing too badly with the recommendations that we're getting out of this group. It's a starting point for knowing what to expect. So let's dive into what those recommendations are. They recommend that babies, newborns, are getting between 14 and 17 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. And I want to pause and explain the 24-hour period piece. Babies and children nap, but what the American Academy of Sleep Medicine did is look at sleep over a 24-hour period. And I think that's really helpful because there are some cultural differences in nap habits and daytime sleeping versus night. There are some geographic differences. The closer that you live to the equator, the earlier your circadian rhythm will set in. So a baby's circadian rhythm will be emerging earlier. And therefore, daytime and nighttime sleep are going to look different, but total sleep in a 24-hour period can be a little bit more consistent. Third, daytime sleep can vary much more in terms of length of nap and numbers of naps that a baby will take in the day. And so dialing down into how many naps and how long those naps should be is a little trickier than looking at sleep in a total 24-hour period. So let's return to what they're recommending. Newborns would have 14 to 17 hours per day over that 24-hour period. For 4 to 12-month-olds, or 4 to 11-month-olds, and yes, that is a huge range, the recommendation is 12 to 16 hours. For 1 to 2-year-olds, the recommendation is 11 to 14 hours, and for 3 to 5-year-olds, the recommendation is 10 to 13 hours. Now, you'll notice that is gradually dropping with each age group because sleep need drops over time. Now, those ranges most babies fall into. But the National Sleep Foundation also has a broader range of hours in a 24-hour period for sleep, that may be just fine for your particular baby. And those ranges are very broad. For newborns, it's as wide as 11 to 19 hours a day. For 4 to 11-month-olds, it's 10 to 18 hours a day. For 1 to 2-year-olds, it's 9 to 16 hours a day. And for 3 to 5-year-olds, it's 8 to 14 hours a day. Now, I have yet to meet a family that I'm working with whose babies are falling outside of that wide, might be okay range. And almost everyone that I work with has babies that are falling within the recommended age. Now, what does that tell you? Well, it tells you that much of the worry that we have as parents around whether our babies are getting enough are generally not as big a worry as most parents think. What this data doesn't tell us, though, is what is the ideal amount of sleep for your baby. So they're falling in the recommended range, but are they getting enough for their body to thrive? So how do you know if they're getting enough? Well, in general, there are some signs that are going to support you. One is that if they're falling asleep relatively easily in a relatively short period of time, and I realize that's vague because that's going to look very different based on age and temperament. If it's taking an hour and a half to fall asleep, it may be that something is happening with the timing or the total amount of sleep that they're getting. Is your baby waking well rested and in a reasonably good mood? Are they in a flexible and adaptable mood during the day that allows them to play with curiosity without getting too frustrated and be able to do the things that babies need to do during the day, including feeding, socializing, and play? And are they generally awake and alert during the day when they're not sleeping? Now, if your baby is not doing these things, it does not mean that they're not getting enough sleep. There may be other reasons for this as well. And if you're wanting to explore what it looks like to rule out if your baby is overtired, I am including a link to episode 12 that talks about overtiredness in babies. One of the other things to look into, though, if you are worried about whether your baby's getting enough sleep or sleep quality, is to look at underlying health issues. As rare as they are, something like obstructive sleep apnea is going to interfere with normal sleep cycles. Your baby won't be getting into the deep sleep that we would expect, and they're going to wake up tired. But the last factor that I think is so important to talk about is temperament. Temperament is something innate to us. It impacts how we relate in the world and how we manage our rhythm and routine, how persistent we are, how sensitive we are. There's nothing inherently wrong with any temperament out there. However, a highly sensitive temperament may have more difficulty with falling asleep and staying asleep. In addition to that, there are some kiddos with a highly sensitive temperament who also have lower sleep needs than average. I often describe to parents who are working with me that highly sensitive kiddos need more of everything except for sleep. These are the kiddos that may refuse naps or drop naps early. Bedtime may be very late, or they may be very early risers, and they may have intense personalities, but you may find that they actually are thriving just fine on less sleep, and that trying to get them more sleep leads to frustration for you and them. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about daytime sleep as well, because this is the part that really varies widely. The data that we have on daytime sleep is not very tight, but having a ballpark can go a long way for parents to be able to plan the day and to have at least some expectation around how much their babies are going to need during the day. I'll remind you that this varies by age, of course. Babies that are very young need daytime sleep more often to relieve that sleep pressure. It varies by culture. There are some cultures where napping is still routine in school-age children. And in fact, some data suggests that mood, behavior, and learning actually improve when there's an occasional short nap for school-age children. And it can vary by geography too. Also, I'll point out that one of the biggest difference in napping routines for babies are what kind of napper your baby is. There's this tendency to think that the longer the nap, the better, and that 1 to 2 hour naps are ideal, but the fact is there are some cat nappers out there who are doing just fine with short 30-minute naps frequently during the day. Yes, it is more difficult for parents because we're spending time supporting them to get into sleep. We might be supporting them to try to bridge 2 sleep cycles with a nap, and we're doing it more often with short cat nappers than we are with robust nappers who have chunky naps. But let's start with the ballpark. For 3 to 6 month old, well, actually, I'm going to start with newborns. Their napping and their sleeping is spread out throughout the 24-hour period. So you could spread it all out over the day to look for that 11 to 19 hours over the 24-hour period. Daytime and nighttime sleep is not going to look all that different. It's not until about 6 months that things start consolidating a little bit more at night, or 5 to 6 months. But by 3 to 6 months, we're generally seeing, on average, 4 naps a day and daytime sleep that's totaling about 4 to 5 hours a day. Now, keep in mind, all of these numbers are going to be in a resource, and that link will be in the podcast show notes. For 6 to 9 month olds, they've dropped down generally to 3 naps. Sometimes it happens sooner, sometimes it happens later, but they're getting 3 to 4 hours of sleep during the day. Now notice that's a little bit of a drop from the 3 to 6 month group. So where is that drop happening? So if they're getting less during the day, are they getting more at night? Maybe, but remember, overall sleep need has probably dropped as well. And if we were to pick where we wanted sleep to be moving, it would be nighttime sleep. So as daytime sleep drops, nighttime sleep may stay the same. For 9 to 16 month olds, so getting into that toddler phase, many babies are down to 2 naps a day and they're getting about 2 to 3 hours. So those naps tend to be longer, an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours. Those naps don't have to be even. They can be one can be short and one can be long. And then by the time we get well into the toddler years, the 16 to 24 month olds, often they're down to 1 nap of 2 to 3 hours. By age 2, some babies are not napping, although most babies need a nap at age 2. So they're getting 1 nap that's up to 2 hours, and it gradually shortens until that nap fades away. Now, I'll remind you that culturally and geographically, naps vary a lot, and the timing of sleep is going to vary a lot as well. So as you can imagine, many of the clients that I work with have kiddos who are dropping naps earlier than average. And I see them more often than babies who are napping robustly because babies with high sleep needs are getting enough sleep for their parents to get enough sleep. So I don't often hear from them. Instead, I'm hearing from the ones who are dropping sleep early and not sleeping as easily or don't have as high a sleep need. Now, to recap, in general, sleep needs are going to drop over time and sleep is going to move over from daytime into nighttime sleep. But beyond the recommendations that we get from the National Sleep Foundation, you can look at your baby as being the best clue to whether their sleep needs are being met. Last, if you're seeing signs that your baby is not getting good quality sleep or is not getting the sleep that they need to thrive, it may be total sleep that's the challenge, but it's worth ruling out other things as well. And the very last point I'll make, because it can be so hard when our babies are not sleeping as much as we think they should be sleeping, or as much as the books say they should be sleeping, is to know that every baby is different. If you're struggling with looking for sleep cues to help support you, or you're worried that your baby is cranky and chronically grumpy because they're not getting good quality sleep, that's when it's valuable to reach out to your doctor, to reach out to a sleep coach, and get some support for optimizing sleep to make it as easy as possible for your baby to get the sleep they need so that you can get the rest that you need to. One of the best ways to do that is to prioritize having a routine or rhythm to your day. This isn't going to make your baby sleep, but it does help support the natural rhythms for sleep that are emerging from them so that you can shore up those natural rhythms and be able to invite sleep at times when they are tired and to not be working too hard on trying to get sleep to happen when they're not. Make sure to take a peek at the show notes because I'm going to have a link to the National Sleep Foundation article on their consensus. I am going to have a link to a blog that I wrote on how much sleep your baby needs, and there'll be a resource with a picture, a graphic of the National Sleep Foundation recommendations. Use it as a guide, not as a rigid set of rules. And if you need help, you know where to find me. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode, and until then, I wish you a peaceful night's sleep. Thank you for joining me on this episode. I do hope that you found the information and perspectives in this podcast episode helpful to you as you navigate your baby's sleep development. Of course, this podcast provides general information, and it isn't tailored to your family's reality or the specific needs of your baby. If you're concerned about your baby's sleep or health, be sure to reach out to your healthcare provider. If you're feeling exhausted and overwhelmed and you need a place to feel nurtured and reassured, you can find me on Instagram at familysleep.ca. Until next episode, look for the connections that support you and your baby.